Greetings! It's so good to be making another video. It feels so good. I have been off the radar for quite some time, just trying to figure things out and move my life in a positive direction. But I think it's finally starting to manifest. There have been a lot of goals and dreams that I've been wishing for and hoping to move in that direction. But life just sort of has its way with you sometimes, and we do the best we can with what we've got at any given moment. And so the best I've got at this moment right now is making this video, making this resource. And I want to talk about the idea of perfection, because it's something that it carries a lot of weight for a lot of people. Either the idea of perfectionism being a bad thing, or even just the idea of striving for perfection, striving for bliss, and that kind of divine oneness. And it feels to me more and more lately like it resonates with me, the ideas that I've been coming up with, that have been coming to me surrounding this topic. So I'd like to share some of that with you. And the two kind of directions that I want to talk about perfection with are this idea of like a limiting, kind of confining, retracting smallness when it comes to perfection, and how it can kind of make us feel like we're not enough and will never be enough, and that it's sort of like impossible to attain. And so what's the point in trying? There's all this kind of stuff that comes up when we think about perfectionism, and the idea that if I can't get it 100% perfect exactly the way I want it, then I'm just not going to do it. I'm not even going to go there, because it's not going to be like this incredible, perfect vision that I have. And the other direction that is very interesting to me and inspiring to me is the idea of perfection as a sort of acceptance of what is. And not really in a cathartic, like giving up kind of sense, but in a, sorry, I'm trying to figure out the best way to hold this phone up to get this video. But this idea that perfection can be an expansive notion, that it can be a inspiring notion. And I can't really go into that without talking about the philosophy behind it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go into my kind of like personal ideas surrounding this expansive view of perfection. And for me, it is that wherever we are, whatever place we're in, whatever messages we're receiving, and whatever experiences we're having, and feelings we're experiencing, and judgments we're experiencing, and limiting beliefs, and these kind of like expansive beliefs that come out of growing with that. In the moment that you are experiencing this, you are choosing to engage with whatever it is you're engaging with. And I don't mean that in the ableist kind of like you create your own reality mumbo jumbo. Like, that's great and I love it, but it's not always helpful, especially if you have mental illness, especially if you have physical disabilities. Like, it can get very shadowy in a hurry when you go down that road. So I that's not what vibes with me, but rather the understanding that whatever place you're in, whatever body you're in, whatever thoughts you're having, whatever relationships you're in and experiences you're going through, they're there. You're in that moment. We're in that moment. We're here now. And so this kind of bleeds over a little bit into that whole be here now concept by Ram Dass. And it's not, for me, perfection is not so much about changing things as much as it is about accepting that change is inevitable. Growth and decay are both ultimately inevitable. And as we experience that in many different layers in our life, I think it can get kind of overwhelming for a lot of people, because it's like we don't always see what is decaying, and we don't always see what is growing in its place. And that's, like, for me, that's really where magic and choice and direction and intuition and listening and acceptance and all this stuff sort of takes on new meaning and sort of becomes incredibly powerful and influential in the most wonderful way. It doesn't always feel good, and I think that's what's kind of like counterintuitive about the idea of like something being perfect, because the very idea of the perfectionism, contracting idea of perfect, that it's it's just so, it's exactly the way it's supposed to be. It's kind of deceiving, because in that perception we see perfection as something that is static. With that worldview, perfection becomes something that is stagnant and something that cannot be anything other than this very extremely limiting idea or concept. And I think the reality of life and everything that is that it is, in a way, always in perfection. It's always perfect, not because it has no flaws, not because it doesn't need to change, but exactly because it is changing, and because it is growing, and because things are decaying and new things are coming into existence. So that's kind of inspiring for me, because it's like whatever ideas you have about the world, about justice, about psychology, your own mind and the way you think about things, and your own mental health, and your relationships with other people, connections with other people, all of these incredible and huge monumental concepts. I like to give them permission to be flawed, because I feel like when you accept that something has parts that are growing and has parts that are at the same time decaying, it becomes a lot easier to kind of be a gardener of your soul, if as it were, or a gardener of the world, and to kind of see things that, you know, nurture the environment, that nurture the ecosystem that you're in, that nurture your mind, that nurture your body, that nurture your relationships, that nurture society, and to see parts that are decaying and rapidly kind of declining the wellness and the well-being of your soul, your mind, society, the world at large, connections, and so forth and so on. So, you know, the act of gardening is really holy, I think, you know, as a metaphor, and literally as, you know, as an act that we partake in the physical world, because it is something where you are teaching yourself constantly. You're learning from others constantly, and you're learning from the plants that you're working with, the animals that you're working with. And perfection doesn't have to feel constricting. It doesn't have to feel like you're being locked in and tied down to, like, you know, it has to be just so. I want to see these plants. I want to see these things growing. You know, I want to see this part of my soul developing. I want to see this part of my relationship growing, or these parts of my society flourishing. Obviously, yes, we have goals, and we have inspiration, and we have things that we look at and we go, this is it, this is perfect, this is what we want. But those things already exist, in our mind at least, and somewhat in the world around us. And yes, there are things that we want to sort of cut away and diminish and regrow and send back to the soil, as it were, to start over and to compost and to become something new. And there's a lot of that has to be done. I'm not in any way, shape, or form saying that things are the way exactly they should be. Obviously, we have a lot of hostile, aggressive, violent forces at work in the world. And I would like to take this opportunity to nurture the parts of the world that are sustaining and supporting people of color and people with disabilities, and people who haven't always had the same opportunities as everybody else, quote unquote, everybody else. And I just say that because obviously not everybody has had these opportunities, and it's so, like, you know, breaking down the colonialism and the patriarchy in my own speech and thought patterns and communication style is tricky, and it's constant, and it's really hard to do that if you're not surrounding yourself with people who are doing that work as well, and who are also holding you accountable and saying, like, that's kind of interesting that you say that. Why would you say that way? You know, why would you allude to that when it so obviously isn't the case? And then we can get down to the nitty-gritty and do the work and kind of see ourselves more clearly, and also help, you know, we can then be a clearer mirror and reflection for others who are also trying to break the system down and see things more as they really are, and less as we've all kind of in some way been conditioned or programmed to see them. All of us, you know, not all of us obviously, but a lot of us. So it's tricky, and I think the idea of perfection in a climate such as this, in a global climate such as this, is really bizarre, because it's like there's so much pain, and there's so much loss, and there's so much insensitivity and cruelty that, you know, how could you possibly think of this as perfect? And I think that is the constant, ever-changing, ever-shifting weight of duality. That is the space that we find ourselves in when we strive to do spiritual or personal work and development, social work and development, interpersonal work and development. Like, all these things are so nuanced, and the dynamics are so inextricably connected to one another, and I just think it's imperative to find ways of visualizing what we are doing in a way that is helpful, that is not whitewashed or you know, sort of mainstream or whatever, because a lot of the times what is presented as status quo is missing a lot of depth and a lot of subtlety, and that's why I want to have these kind of conversations about, like, what is perfection. You know, we have this projected idea, the constricting, kind of limiting perspective that kind of holds us back and makes us contract and makes us think, like, oh, I can't do this because it isn't going to be just right, it isn't going to be perfect. And then we have I don't even like saying things like this, but I'm going to say it just to get my point across. Then we have the higher vibe version of perfection, the expansive, sort of inspiring growth idea of perfection. And that is just that, you know, anything is possible. And in a way, it already exists. And that goes both ways, you know, for the best of everything we want and everything we strive for, and for the worst, and the things we fear, and the things that just make us recoil and kind of, you know, not feel so great. I think it's worth mentioning that being inspired and being hopeful when you're thinking about perfection and living in the moment and feeling grateful for everything that already is, while also working towards things, for things to be better and for things to feel better, and for yourself and for others to do better. Inspiration is powerful, And it's an area where we can kind of forget how helpful inspiration really is. And I think this is one of the things that I'm pretty sure I've heard it referenced before, and I want to say it was Kellyanne Maddox, but I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure she said something about this. But the collective shadow involving comparison and inspiration is really tricky and sticky. And when we find ourselves doubting ourselves and feeling bad about ourselves and sort of looking down on others and ourselves, you know, comparing ourselves to others or comparing others to us, and sort of going to a very low frequency, low vibe place, I think that's where we have an opportunity to kind of flip the narrative and flip the switch and be inspired instead, and to be kind of like hopeful and see what others are doing and what others are striving for and attaining, however it's manifesting for them. You know, we can kind of see that as a opportunity for us, you know, to be motivated and be inspired to do something similar. I do think that focus and aware of our energetic output is like a really potent way to guide that inspiration. I think if you're feeling, you know, like, oh yeah, there's tons of things that inspire me, I could be inspired by everything else out there seems so perfect and so attainable and worthy, and you know, I feel so low, so small, you know, what can I do? What measly little thing can I do? And it's like just choosing something, you know, picking something that makes you feel powerful, that makes you feel strong, that makes you feel better, that makes you feel good. You know, if it makes you feel inspired and it makes you feel worthwhile and worthy and all the good stuff, then the chances are that it's probably going to help somebody else too. And the other parts of this that I just wanted to touch on briefly is allowing ourselves to visualize what is possible in a productive way. I recently had it pointed out to me that or at least I had it pointed out, and I realized that it's very easy for me to slip into kind of catastrophizing and seeing like how bad things can get and how much worse things can get, and like kind of like preparing for the worst, and you know, the anxiety bull kind of starts to rage. And I think when it comes to being grateful and being inspired and being motivated to actually do the work, do helpful work for yourself and for others, there does have to be that focus in that direction. And I think a lot of that is just about consistency and persistence, whether it's a spiritual practice or a physical practice or a mental health practice, you know, something that kind of grounds you and brings you back to, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to focus on, and sort of like allowing yourself to chart that journey and to see your progress and to see your movement and to see your development and your growth. It just kind of like, it can give you the keys to the ignition to get this road trip started for whatever it is you're trying to manifest and create in the world. Now there were two other things that I wanted to mention, just as far as like I guess like not getting sidetracked, and not getting waylaid by your own kind of like doubts and misgivings about something, because it's like, okay, yeah, you can be grateful for everything that is, and then you can end up staying and remaining in a situation that is like not healthy and that is like not good for you, and you can like end up, you know, continuing to do something that is like taking away from yourself in some way, and kind of like shorting yourself a little bit, cutting yourself short, your potential and your ability short. And I think that that tendency is just kind of like balance, and not in the good way. You know, seeing things as all kind of like an even playing field, without that concept of like, okay, there's healthy, nurturing things that we want to grow and develop and fulfill and sustain, and there's things that are not helpful, that are kind of like, you know, declining, and they're, you know, having this kind of downward spiral kind of effect on themselves or things around them. And those are the kind of things we need to like bring back. You know, we need to ground them, and we need to grow something from that. And I think the most helpful thing I can say is just like, be here now. You know, whatever is helpful now. It's like, don't be so patient that you forget to act, and don't be so balanced that you forget to look for justice, and you forget to do things for wholesome, you know, motivational, helpful, you know, inspiring reasons. And I think that there's this kind of weird narrative storyline out there that's like, if it's gonna be helpful and high vibe, it's gonna feel great all the time, it's gonna be good all the time, it's gonna be light and positive and cheery and happy all the time. And I think the opposite is actually true. I think when we are, I mean, it does feel great sometimes. I'm not trying to say it will never feel good. Obviously, sometimes it does feel fucking fantastic. But there are going to be times where it's going to be difficult, and it's going to be painful, and it's going to hurt. There are some truths about ourselves that are not pretty to look at, and not pretty to acknowledge, and not fun to take responsibility for and take accountability for. And those things are hard, they're painful, but we do not have to lose our dignity and our respect for ourselves, and our love for ourselves, and our compassion for ourselves, just to say, hey, you know, I was wrong. I was doing this really poorly, and I need to do better. I think that's actually one of the most self-loving and compassionate things that we can do, is to say, I'm wrong. I need to do better. So I think, yeah, when it comes to seeing perfection and seeing you know, our present moment and our opportunities and what's available and what's around us and surrounding us, I think it's I think perfection is one of those, like, it almost feels like an offshoot of that toxic comparison versus inspiration, you know, collective shadow. You know, it's very much like there's either no way to get to what we want, so there's no reason to do anything, and we can just, you know, have this huge pity party and feel terrible for our whirl and ourselves and give up. Or we can see that we're here for a reason. And I don't mean that in some like fate, kind of like bizarro way. I'm not really sure how I feel about all that. But I do mean that we have a choice. We're here. We have a choice. We can act. While I have breath left in me, there is work yet to be done. And I feel very strongly that there's a reason that we see what we see and why the things come across our path. And like I said, I don't think it's necessarily that we're on this destiny path and this is, exactly, what we're supposed to be doing and it's all sort of pre-planned. But I do very strongly believe that our higher self, our spiritual self, our energetic self sees things and puts things together a lot faster than our conscious ego does. So by the time our conscious ego notices this stuff and goes, oh, hey, this is an opportunity, this is something that's going on, this is something somebody is doing, what can I do? What do I have to contribute? What do I have to create? It's like, yeah, there's a reason we're feeling that way. There's a reason we're potentially feeling very inspired and very hopeful and very happy about what could be. And that work, that discovery process, that processing of shadows and deliverance of lessons is not always going to feel good. In fact, it's often very painful, but the reward is monumental. It's humongous.